Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tip Talk. I am Sarah Walworth.
I am Christina McGrath, and we are Knitting Tech Editors.
So here on Tech Tip Talk, we answer your questions about tech editing, knitting design, pattern writing. We invite you now to put any questions you have for us into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them.
So this month, we are being joined by Chaitanya Muralidhara, who is a colleague of ours. She's a knitting and crochet tech editor with a background in scientific publishing, and mathematics. And she's been tech editing for indie designers and publications for like 12 years, okay? We love working with her because she's super experienced. She knows so much, and she shares our passion for working on patterns that are, well done and help crafters create their hand knit wardrobe. So we're really excited to have her today. We have a lot of questions for her. So let's bring her in, Sarah.
All right, so let's bring her in. And there she is. And hold on, I got to put you in the right spot. Center stage. There you are. Hello, Chaitanya.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. We're so excited to talk to you, and we think that everybody and we have questions for you, everything.
Thank you so much for having me. I know we tried to schedule this a few times and always ran into issues, so third time's the charm. Thanks so much for being flexible. I'm so excited to talk to both of you. Yeah.
It's excellent. So I'm gonna throw a comment into the chat. You can see the chat on YouTube. Hey, y'all who are joining us, please feel free to throw any questions you have for Chaitanya into the chat, and we'll ask her directly. Christina, you want to start?
Sure. So, like I said in the intro that I totally fumbled, I'm sorry. You've been tech editing for a long time, like 12 years. So, what is your specialty? What do you love to edit, and why?
I edit both knitting and crochet patterns. What I love to edit is a little bit different from what I get to edit, but I love to edit sweaters because I think once I realized I like to knit sweaters, my knitting just took off. And I really enjoy wearing sweaters, and I'm finally in a climate which allows me to wear sweaters all year long. So that's what I'm really excited to edit, but I enjoy editing accessories as well. So I think I enjoy anything that's like, my goal is really to make sure that knitters and crocheters have a nice user-friendly experience, but also feel empowered to make alterations to suit their needs. So patterns that keep that in mind are what I enjoy editing the most.
Right.
All right. So I have to ask you, I forgot to ask you this before, but the sweater that you're wearing.
Isn't this lovely? This is Indira by Anjali Devan. It was released, I want to say, September of last year, and it is a top-down colorwork yoke and stockinette, and I really enjoyed knitting it.
It's a gorgeous color too.
Fingering weight sweater, which is perfect for this weather.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what we talked about in the pre-show about top-down yoke sweaters, or in the things that we mentioned. The question that we got, which was really interesting, was what is your biggest pet peeve when it comes to editing patterns? And I think you mentioned a couple that I'd love to dive into deeper.
So this is not so much a pet peeve, because I realize this comes from a place of designers wanting to expand their size range. But I think one thing I would recommend to designers is to think about how your design is going to work out in larger sizes, because some design decisions that you make for smaller sizes might not scale up the way you think. And one thing we were talking about is when you have a circular yoke, you only have a limited amount of vertical room to make all your increases. And that usually works out fairly evenly in the smaller segment of your size range. But as you scale up, even to maybe a 50-inch chest, you're not going to be able to accommodate all your increases without getting some puckering, right? You don't see it in the sweater, so it's not a good example. But there are a lot of designs, sometimes you see them online and you're like, oh, why. So you can't, so you have to think about where you're going to stack your increases.
Yes.
I think we were talking about how it's somewhat evident that you can't increase on every round when you're knitting top down. But when you're knitting bottom up, we tend to sometimes forget that you can't also decrease on every round. So you need to space out those increases or decreases so your yoke looks flat. And unfortunately, I think a lot of this is not very easy to detect with tech editing alone. So it needs some amount of swatching or test knitting. So I would encourage designers to think about that. It's something you want to consider. And another thing you could do, which I think a lot of designers do fairly successfully, is to do some raglan increases, right?
Yes.
So you don't have to have all your increases within your yoke, especially if your yoke is patterned, if it's color work or texture or whatever. You can increase at your raglan points afterwards. Similarly with decreases. So that's a very effective way to solve that problem. And then
I love how you say it isn't necessarily, it is something that can be found in tech editing. Sometimes it's also how the fabric will behave related to those increases that has to be, it has to be found out in testing, like to get that plump of increases where you have a lot of increases right after the neckline can make a big bulge.
Right. And the shoulder is where it shows up, right? Like you have a puffy sleeve when you don't intend to have a puffy sleeve.
Well, like you said, I might not be able to wait till testing. You might need to do some swatching.
Right.
I mean, maybe you have to make a couple yokes in a couple different sizes to figure out how those increases or decreases are going to play out, because it's really not always something you can envision like while you're tech editing. I mean, even sometimes I'll chart things out on paper, to try to figure out how the increases are going to work out, but you can't always really know how that's going to play out in the fabric. So,
and a lot of this depends on gauge as well, right? If you have a very flowy, loose gauge, those ruffles are going to show more than if you have a tighter gauge. So I think it's also very designer specific how you choose to space out your decreases, what type of fabric you choose to have. Can you hide them effectively within your patterning, or do you need to do something else? And two resources I've found that don't directly address this issue but are kind of helpful is the Strange Brew book by Tincan Knits.
Yes.
I will say that what they do is they stack their increases and decreases outside of the color work pattern, but you can choose to do it either way. But Interweave Knits also put out a circular yoke book, which also talks about what the proportions should be. And I think that's a nice starting point.
Yeah, because you're right that it's going to depend also on the fabric, what kind of fabric you're making, how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and maybe if you have something like ribbing or brioche in your yoke, it doesn't matter as much because the ruffling is going to be hidden within that fabric. But if it is going to be more stockinette based, then you're going to see it.
Yeah.
That's excellent. That book on designing circular yokes, do you know the name of it? I'm wondering if we're thinking of the same one.
Yeah, so Sarah's putting the book titles in the comments for people. So.
Oh, and Chaitanya's going to be on it too. Look at her, she's going.
This is The Art of Circular Yokes.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, I know that book.
We love that. I love that book. The introduction is very well written for designers to help. Let me see if I think I have it up here. There it is. It was done by edited by Carrie Bogart. Is this one?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay, yeah, it's fantastic. The introduction is pretty phenomenal by Holly Yo. So,
and one design choice I think you can choose to make is also to start with like a provisional cast on and then pick up stitches and do that last part bottom up if you really want to do your yoke top down. That gives you a little bit of flexibility, I think, is to do short. And also you don't have to put all your short rows in one place, right? You can split them up into the neck and the back of the before and after the yoke. Having trouble with words today, but yeah.
Do you find that works well, putting the short rows not all here?
It depends. I think sometimes it can look kind of ungainly to have like 2 inches of short rows before you start color work, especially if your color work starts pretty high up like it does in the sweater. So I think this is a sweater where the designer chose to have short rows both at the very start and then after the color work, and I think it works pretty well. Another pattern I knit recently that does that is the cobblestone sweater by Jared Flood, which is, everyone knows that sweater, right? So I think it's kind of effective that you don't have a whole bunch of extra fabric. It's kind of more evenly split. But then again, it depends on the type of yoke and the length.
Sometimes a good way to go. It'll look better instead of looking like a big chunk of short rows. Yeah, that's great. That's all these awesome design solutions, right? To all these. So that maybe leads us into, what are the errors that you come across the most in your editing?
I don't know about come across the most, but I think something that, again, this is coming from a place of designers wanting to expand their size range. So one thing I see quite often is that in trying to be more size inclusive, the one place that designers often stumble is not making the upper arm circumference large enough for larger sizes, and also making the neckline too wide.
Yes.
So the neckline doesn't scale along with chest circumference. So that's something we need to keep in mind. Conversely, if you're knitting a turtleneck, please make sure your turtleneck goes over people's heads.
Yes, you're designing somewhat of a hat there that has to go.
It has to be a little more comfortable than a hat.
Yeah. We get a lot of questions about necklines, and it's important to remember that's one of the points on the body that doesn't change very much
between sizes, like as you get bigger.
It doesn't scale as much as the chest does, right? And similarly with upper arm, if you're going to have a 14-inch upper arm circumference on a 56-inch chest, that's not going to work for most people. It doesn't matter how fitted your sleeve is supposed to be, it's just not going to work.
No.
So that's something I think is helpful. If you think just looking at a sizing chart is not helpful enough, then maybe having some test knitters in those sizes will help detect those kinds of errors fairly quickly. Another thing I see that I wish people would consider a little more is when you're doing your increases or decreases, I know that our intuition tells us to space them out across the length of the sleeve. But I think one thing to keep in mind is that not everybody is going to get your row gauge, right? So I like to leave a little bit of room so that
on both ends.
Yeah. Right? So leave a couple of inches up top and a couple of inches before you get to the cuff, so that if people do have row gauge issues, they can make adjustments.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something I learned from working with another tech editor that I've tried to keep in mind ever since, is that people don't meet your row gauge.
No. And that goes back to what you were saying about creating patterns that knitters can make changes to if they need to accommodate.
And this is not even a change, right? Even if people are using the exact same yarn and needles that you are, or even hitting your stitch gauge. I'm one person who can never match the row gauge of most designers. I will always be like 20% larger in row gauge. So this is a modification I've had to make 90% of the time. So it's something I try to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a question that we've gotten before, is then, do you think that including unblocked gauge in a pattern is wise? Because of that?
I don't know how helpful that is, right? We've talked about this before. And it's so dependent on the yarn. Not every yarn is going to block out bigger in both stitch and row gauge. Like I recall working with, I think it was Mano's silk blend, where the row gauge shrunk after I blocked it, which is unusual, but it happens. And what if someone's using something that's a completely different fiber composition, right? So you expect wool to behave a certain way, but what happens with silk or cotton or something? So blocked gauge is probably the most useful. Yeah. And in the stitch pattern that the majority of your garment is. And if there is more than one stitch pattern, please give your tech editor information about all of the stitch patterns.
Yes, please.
Even if you don't decide to include it in your final pattern, please give them that information that's necessary.
Yeah, I love the tech editor needs to know the gauges even if you don't put them in your pattern.
Right.
Because it helps us to check everything and make sure that your numbers match.
Right.
So you've already given a ton of great information for a newer designer. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there taking notes. But what advice would you specifically give to a designer that's just starting out? I think this is kind of a tricky spot for a lot of people where they're just beginning. Do you have any advice?
Right. So I think this is something that I think Katrina also mentioned in your earlier interview as well. But I think the best advice I have is to read other designers' patterns. Ideally, you would want to knit from other designers' patterns or crochet from other designers' patterns, but time is limited. So try to read as many patterns as you can, or as many, and not just reading books about designing or like advice about designing, but actually read patterns. So that helps you know, one, how to write patterns, what style to follow, or what you're to refine your style preferences. But I think it also helps to know how people have solved certain design issues, right? So I like to knit sweaters from a variety of designers, and it's always interesting to me how people solve this very issue of this yoke puckering,
Yeah.
or how people like to divide the front and the back of a circular sweater, right? You don't have to have exactly the same number of stitches on the front and the back. Those kinds of things are things I think you pick up if you read other designers' patterns, even if you're not going to knit them. That's something I do frequently. I will buy a pattern just because it looks like an interesting construction and I want to know how they did it. This is especially true of crochet, because in crochet, there isn't this one standard way of writing patterns. You can choose to define your stitch abbreviations as tightly or as loosely as you want. So especially with crochet, I think it helps to read a lot of patterns to figure out what your preference is and what you find clearest, because if you don't find it clear enough, you're not going to be able to write it that way.
We did get a question in our Discord network this month about what you were saying about reading several different patterns to find out how designers solve these problems. And what the question was like, is there often more than one way to solve the same design problem, solve the same fit problem, solve the same grading problem? Like, does it all, is there really one right way, to get those increases in, or are there several ways that designers could choose to do it?
There are always multiple ways, right? I think that's the flexibility of the knit and crochet fabric itself. It's not the way it's not like sewing. I don't know how to sew, but I do know enough to know that there isn't that amount of flexibility in sewing as there is in knitting. So I think there are multiple ways to solve the same problem. You could just, so if we're talking about this whole yoke issue, you could just choose to like start with a wider yoke and then increase and then pick up stitches and decrease, or you could choose to do a combination of yoke increases versus raglan increases. And I'm sure we all remember back when top-down raglans were really popular, the inclination was to say, make raglan increases until yoke depth is big enough for your armhole. And that does not work. That breaks down at like size 42-inch chest.
Yeah,
But,
or sooner.
and then we had designers figuring out that if you distribute those increases, so you have only body increases or only sleeve increases for some sizes, and if you stack them a certain way, you can resolve those issues. And an alternative way to do that is to maybe just have like a mixture of circular versus raglan increases. So there are always multiple ways to solve the same design issue. It's just a question of what works best with your intentions for a design, I think.
Right. It depends on what the other things are that are going on in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like anything with math. Like you can arrive at the same solution in a variety of ways. It just has to fit within the parameters of what you want that thing to look like at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one solution might be to just make a really long yoke, and maybe that solves your problem, and that matches what your intention or your vision for the design was.
Right. So, kind of taking a sideways bunny trail here. what are you excited about now? And you can take this any way you want. What are you excited about in your own personal projects or in what you see coming down the line in your tech editing?
Uh, okay, I'm going to talk about something I'm excited to see in the crafting world in general, and that is, I think it's been really interesting to see crafting publications embracing more than just crafting, more than just knitting and crochet, whether it be other type of crafts or social justice issues. And the publications that come to mind are Pom Pom, and even more specialized publications like Radical Threads, which are really putting the spotlight on groups that you don't really see represented in your traditional crafting industry. So that has been really exciting to watch. And also smaller collectives that are not necessarily publications like Indesco, which is the Indian Designers Collective. I hope I'm saying that right. So I'm really excited to see groups like this form that are designers you wouldn't necessarily have seen 5 to 10 years ago, trying to spotlight other similar designers, yarn producers, fiber producers, and just people doing things in the fiber industry that are not your traditional design model or yarn dyeing model. So that's something that's, I think, in the past few years that has come out that is really interesting to me in the direction this industry is taking.
I think it's exciting because then it allows a lot more designers to come to be available.
Right.
So it's a platform that's specific to these groups that are marginalized, but it allows us to just dive in deep into their designs and they don't get missed.
Right. And I think it helps overall with innovation when you're seeing people take inspiration from their cultures and their traditions who were not necessarily born knitting necessarily. Maybe that wasn't a part of their heritage, but they are incorporating parts of it. So I think one excellent example is the designer Sylvia Watts Cherry. She's with Cherries on Top too on Instagram, and her intarsia works are amazing.
Phenomenal, right?
Oh just mind-blowing. And she takes inspiration from fabrics and the different kinds of prints that she sees, and it's just amazing. So you're seeing all these innovative designs that you probably wouldn't have seen if people all drew from the same sources of inspiration.
And it's sort of frustrating because why just now are we seeing, these artists have been doing this work for a long time. It just wasn't being shown. So it is very exciting.
There is a lot of, so I have recently started browsing TikTok, and there are a lot of creators who do very in-depth commentary on why are we only now seeing a revival of these kinds of colorful motifs in architecture and art. And it's not that it didn't always exist, but it was always thought of as less desirable, the whole clean white aesthetic. I say sitting in my very white room, which is a choice, or which is not a choice, it's just laziness, but still. So there is a lot of interesting analysis on why we're seeing these kinds of trends pop up only now, that accent walls are a thing now, and more bright furniture and bright decor items are only a thing now.
It's exciting. I think we can all use more color and more in different perspectives. Really make us better people and make it a better world. The more that we can hear other things, new things.
Which, let's be honest, knitting your own garments is not the most cost-effective or even the most time-effective way to clothe yourself anymore, which is unfortunate, but that is the truth. So
you must have seen my receipt for my last yarn purchase.
So if you are going to take the time and the effort to make your own clothing or accessories, you might as well have some fun with it, right? Why would you knit something that looks like something you bought from H&M? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's how I approach the patterns I picked to knit for myself. So
I totally agree.
So, hey, speaking of that, let's skip down. What is your favorite yarn to work with?
I enjoy fingering weight yarns, and it has been out of necessity because I used to live in Texas for 17 years until recently. And if I wanted to knit sweaters that I could actually wear instead of keep in the closet for 11 and a half months, it had to be fingering weight. Now that I can actually, so I moved to the Northeast recently and I can actually wear worsted weight sweaters. So that might change. But I still enjoy knitting with fingering weight yarns simply because of the variety that's available. I do enjoy superwash hand-dyed yarns very much. I like yarns like Brooklyn Tweed Loft that are a little more woolen spun and crunchy. And I just like the possibilities with fingering weight because you can choose to knit with it on its own, do color work, do things like brioche, which knit at my gauge, worsted weight would be too large for. Yeah, I just really enjoy the variety. And you have all kinds of fiber blends available. So there are things that are more warm weather appropriate and things that are more fluffy and woolen. So yeah.
And you you want to tell us about what you shared with us, what you just stumbled upon? You just got something gorgeous.
Oh, my yarn purchase. Yeah, I was just telling them that I went to a farmer's market recently that was local to me, like 3 miles from where I live, and I found a vendor I have purchased from before, but I didn't realize they were so close to me and so local to me. And I purchased a sweater quantity of Cormo that is undyed, and that is also a yarn I enjoy very much. And I'm
I
looking
should have
forward
asked you to
to
like grab it so we could squish it through the screen.
right? It's so pretty.
I love it. So, what's your favorite notion? What's your favorite knitting or crochet? What do you always like gravitate to?
Boring answer, but stitch markers. I love stitch markers of all kinds. I am I'm an unapologetic stitch marker user. I will use them but to mark pattern repeats. I will use them to mark increases and decreases. I will use them to, I will tell my designers I work with to use them in every place that a stitch marker would make life easier. So for example, a lot of times designers will go to great lengths to avoid using stitch markers and describe in words, pick up stitches from this point to this point. Just place a stitch marker, right? It makes everyone's life so much easier. Or things like if you're having very subtle armhole shaping and you don't think that it's easily recognizable once the piece is finished, put a stitch marker on either side before you start your armhole decreases or something, right? I also am someone who will put down projects for months before I pick them back up again. So if I have made modifications to one sleeve, which I always have to do, I don't know what I did on the other sleeve. So I leave those stitch markers there between decreases. And so when I do the next sleeve, if it's 2 months from now or 6 years from now, I still know what I did. So yeah.
What's your favorite kind of stitch mark? You like the bulb safety pin one, or do you?
I like the plastic snappy stitch markers, like the clover ones. So you can color code them, which is fantastic because I color code them based on how far apart my increases or decreases are. And for putting between stitches, I like those ones without seams. Like you have those hexagonal stitch markers from coconuts that don't snag your yarn. I love those.
Yes.
I lose them all the time, but
you need a magnet. Like I think they're magnetic, so like you can.
Yeah, those are magnetic.
They are magnetic, aren't they? But I still manage to lose them all the time.
We all do. They're all like stuck in the couch cushions or in pockets or underneath things. Definitely. I get it.
So we did get some comments and questions from our audience for you. One of them was the pet peeve that we talked about. We got.
Oh, can I mention one more pet peeve that is actually a pet peeve? This is absolutely the hill I will die on. When you list your abbreviations, please list them in alphabetical order.
That's Sarah.
Oh my goodness, I cannot tell. This is something I will absolutely mark up multiple times with the same pattern until I convince someone that this is the way to do it.
Tell us why, though. What's the reason?
Okay, so you might be thinking someone's reading a pattern from page 1 to page 10, and they will encounter your BRK on page 3. So it has to be listed in that order, right? But that's not how people reference an abbreviations list. People will not go and look up every single abbreviation. They will only look up the ones that they don't understand. And if you get to page 6 and you don't understand an abbreviation, you have to then scan your entire list to see where it occurs. But everyone is used to looking up things in alphabetical order in the dictionary. Okay, maybe not everyone. Maybe people of our generation. Gen Z probably doesn't know how to do it. But yeah, alphabetical is something universal. People understand how to do it. Listing it in the order it's used in the pattern is not. So please do that. Please list.
It's another way to not confuse anybody, but things will get missed. Like they're going to have an abbreviation. They might not even realize it's in the list, especially if you've got a lot of them. They might think that abbreviation, they might never find it in the list if it's not alphabetical.
Yes, and it's the same thing with tech editing as well. So your tech editor may not be able to find easily enough that you skipped a few abbreviations if you list them in this jumbled way. Sorry, that is the hill I will die on.
Well, I mean, it's one thing if there's 5 abbreviations. It's another thing if there's 55 abbreviations.
Yes.
Because it just makes it unusable. Your list then is unusable.
Even if it's 5 abbreviations, right? It's especially with me, if I'm working through a pattern and I see these 5 abbreviations in a random order, it's going to bother me.
I'm always on this, Sarah. Not even for 5 abbreviations. No way.
This is an absolute rule, Sarah.
We're going to call this Chaitanya's rule.
That's right.
Yes.
Alphabetize.
I will happily lend my name to this rule.
Awesome. We're going to do it. We'll put it in our book that way too. So this is there's no movement on this. This has to happen in every pattern.
This is not negotiable.
Knitting, crochet, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I also really appreciate it when I know sometimes you define special stitches and the inclination is to save some space by not including those special stitches in the abbreviation list. And it's really nice when there is some clue that you have to go somewhere else to look this up. So if space permits, list your special stitches in your main abbreviations and say special stitches. That's really helpful.
Right.
Oh, I agree 100%. I'm all about that. It's got to be usable because it's basically a glossary.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't any glossary that isn't usually alphabetized. So that makes sense. Hey, we want to give a shout out to the people who are watching us live. If you guys have any questions for our guests, please throw them into the comments now so that we can ask her. All right, where are we at, Christina?
Let's ask the last question we got from the audience, which I'm going to read to you. She says, quite a few would-be designers are put off the maths involved with pattern grading and editing because of their neurodivergence, dyscalculia, dyslexia, or anxiety. Do you have any clients who've chosen to work with you because they feel more secure about your professional background? And if so, how do you support them if and when needed?
Okay. So I don't, to my knowledge, I don't think anyone has shared with me that they choose to work with me because of neurodivergence. But there are designers who I work with who I would say rely a little more heavily on me for the math and grading. And the way I support them is, so one, I don't take on a lot of clients like this because time is limited and I don't do this on a full-time basis. But I do make sure that I allow time for additional communication with people like this. There are very few clients with whom I have more like FaceTime or Google chat consults. And that would be people like this who can maybe walk through their intentions for a design, but maybe have trouble articulating it on paper or listing actual stitch counts, for example. So that is something I think designers offer that you might want to ask if you're having trouble with like writing things but can express yourself better verbally, or have issues with, say, grading. Sometimes, so Sarah teaches this course at Tech Editor Hub about grading, and you have this really excellent questionnaire, but people feel intimidated by it, right? But maybe it's easier for a designer to walk through what their intention is for the yoke or the sleeve length, rather than fill out this really lengthy set of questions. So I think that is always an option. There are people who do just grading, and that is a service. I think if that is what is keeping you from designing, I think that is something you can take advantage of as well. And I don't know, Sarah, do you take on grading clients anymore?
I do. Yes. And I have people I can refer for sure.
Yeah, I don't take on clients exclusively for grading. That is not something I enjoy as much. I do it as part of a larger, if I already have a relationship with you, it's something I will work with you on, but I don't do just grading, but I'm happy to refer clients to people who do grading, and who can give you more of a complete package. So I think it's important to find someone who is a good fit, not just for neurodivergent designers, but I think this is an overall theme, is that it's important for you to find someone who's a good fit rather than someone who is, I don't know, the most sought after or the most highly recommended, right?
Yeah.
Because that relationship matters, and it matters that you are able to have mutual respect and communication. So not everyone communicates the same way, and you have to, I think you have to go through, if you have to go through a couple of people to find someone whose communication style matches yours, then I don't think there should be judgment on either part, right? So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question completely, but
I think it does. I think it explains a lot of things that we talk a lot about with our audience, is that designer tech editor relationship is super important. And it's okay to find someone, to keep looking until you find someone that matches you.
And one thing I appreciate so much is when a client tells me, here are the things that I know I'm going to miss, right?
Mhm.
That is so helpful. Like if they say, I'm confident about this, but I don't know if I did this right. So I will know to look at that more carefully. You don't have to say this, but if you know that you are struggling with numbers or math or something, I would say be upfront and tell your tech editor that this is something you struggle with, so that they know they can plan to pay more attention to it than they would with other designs. And if it is something you're doing for the first time and you don't know if you graded E's correctly or something, let them know that as well, so that they know how to check for those things, or to at least pay special attention to those things.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's really the best way to be supportive is to find the communication style and working style that's going to suit your client best. And that's going to give you the best outcome.
Right.
I think it's incredible what you just said. I'm gonna go back and rewatch this and take notes.
And I am also very upfront about things that I either don't have the skills or the inclination to do. So, for example, grading is not something I am particularly enthusiastic about. I will do it if I have worked with you forever. I will not turn you down and I will do my best. But if it is creating a schematic straight away, I will refer you to someone else, or making charts. That's not something I enjoy doing. And I happen to know a lot of people who are great at it and who love doing it. So I'm happy to send you their way. Similarly with socks. Yeah.
You don't
We're
do
just
socks.
a room full of people that don't like to edit socks.
I mean, I have edited
them, but
socks
I
in
don't
the
like to edit
past.
them.
Yeah. Or things like double knitting. I don't know how to double knit, so I will not.
Really?
I don't.
Well, you got to put it on the list of things to learn there, Chaitanya.
I absolutely do. Until I think 2 years ago, I did not know how to knit brioche, and I did not edit brioche. But I think that's how Christina and I met. So I did start editing brioche.
And you're good at it. It's excellent.
So
No, now you can do double knitting. You know, it's that wonderful
I know it
double
still feels.
fabric. So now you can make
Hmm.
yourself a coat to wear in your new environment.
There is a double knit coat pattern that I'm thinking about, the one from Pom Pom. I forget what it's called, but yeah, it's double
Yeah.
knit.
Fantastic. I think we'll see you maybe not editing socks, but maybe double knitting in the future.
Maybe.
Well, I
And
have
you
another.
heard it here first. Her first double knitting project is not going to be a swatch or a scarf. It's going to be a coat.
Of
So
course it is.
that's right. I love it. I love it.
I want to ask, you could take this any way you want, but I want to ask, what would you like to see change in our industry? We already touched a little bit on representation and other issues related to marginalized groups. What else would you like to see?
I will stick with that theme and say that one thing that frustrates me is the assumption that because the fiber world, or the knitting world at least, is dominated by women, there is an assumption that it is inherently more fair, more equitable, more just. And that is very frustrating because that is not true. And it's not that the knitting world is uniquely bad in any way. It is very similar to the rest of the world, right? It operates just like any other industry does. And it's frustrating because if we make this assumption, then we're not going to make meaningful change, right? We're only going to make little tweaks that are nice on the surface, but eventually lead to the same kind of, how do I put this? Clicky behavior.
Yes.
So I think that's exasperating because we still see there is change. Like change is happening, and the industry is, I think, recognizing that there are some shortcomings, or to put it mildly. But I think for the whole system to change, I think we still need to recognize that we're not just a couple of minor tweaks away from perfection, that we still need to examine who we work with and why we chose to work with them. And I think Tian touched upon this in a previous interview, right, where she said that if we still believe that we're doing just great and all we need is a little bit of representation, you're only going to see that representation maybe in the form of models,
Right.
or like featuring test knitters, because yay, I have this test knitter who is different from all my other test knitters who knit my pattern, or I have this customer who I'm going to repost. You're not going to see that change all the way down. You're never going to be able to treat people who are different than you as more than just resources. And that needs to change, right? So you need to be able to respect everybody as complete human beings with their own complex lives. And that's a more fundamental change, I think.
And also you mentioned about the system. So the power structure, who has the say, who are the editors, who are the people making all the decisions.
And how do they choose people to work with, right? Do they choose people who are their friends? And if so, who are you friends with? That that makes a lot of difference, right? You might follow a couple of Black creators on Instagram to diversify your feed, but are you interacting with them in a meaningful way? Are they the people you're thinking of when you have an opportunity for a design or tech editing or whatever else it might be, or an editorial opportunity? Or are you thinking of your same group of friends and they are these other people outside your group who are there to diversify your feed? So, yeah.
So that's that's something that has to change inherently in our concepts and in our thinking. We got to get rid of some bias and our propensity to stay with what's comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy change, nor is that unique to the knitting industry, right? This is true of the world in general. So I think sometimes we get so caught up in thinking that we are somehow exceptional because we're creative and we like to support each other, and it's women supporting women, and it's this whole, girl boss energy. And
Yet still, we have this superficial change that is
yeah.
not down deep.
Right. Or just because we are able to talk about certain issues doesn't mean that anything has changed meaningfully. There is also that. So we have been talking about these things for what, 3-4 years now, but just because we are comfortable enough talking about it, and not everyone is comfortable enough. I think the Instagram knitting community is just such a small niche of the overall knitting world. But yeah, just because we're talking about it doesn't mean that things have changed in a very fundamental way. But I think it's good that we are having these discussions in the open. So that's a good first step, but that's what it is.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that that's what it is. That
Yeah.
It's not like we've arrived, everything's perfect. It's still a work in progress, and it's meaningful work that's important.
And it's ongoing. It's not one thing that you can change and you're set for life. It's a conscious decision you have to make until things change for everyone.
I think and like you mentioned, ask yourself the question when you're at a decision point in your business, who are you working with? Why? What way could this be different? Or ask yourself the questions like you mentioned. I think this is something I have to do too. So I really appreciate that. It's very good. Do we have any questions from our audience? Anybody else who's still joining here live? Throw it into the chat. Christina, do you have a question?
Well, let's talk about what services do you offer? You do crochet and knitting. Are you taking new clients for any services, and how can people find you?
So I do take new clients. I offer tech editing for knitting and crochet. I don't do schematics. I don't do knitting. I can point you to people who do these things and do them very well, but I don't do them myself. I do grading, but with several caveats. So I only do it for people who I have worked with and I kind of know what they're thinking.
Right.
And that's just so that I don't make assumptions that are very far off from what their intentions are, right? So it helps to have that relationship when you're grading for someone. Plus, it takes a long time. So I think you have to be able to trust that your tech editor isn't just spending 5 hours doodling away on Excel, right?
Well, but it's like we talked about, all those decisions that need to be made in the grading
process. And from a
so
designer's perspective, it's a significant investment. So
it depends on what the designer wants, and if you don't have an established relationship with them, you may just be guessing and shooting in the dark. You're not going to know what they really would like to do.
Right. And I do also tend to work best with designers who, okay, how do I say this? Designers who are very familiar with their own designs, so they're not expecting their tech editor to do most of their decision making.
That's awesome.
So yeah, and I do take new clients. I do want to say upfront that I don't do this full time. So I also work with designers who aren't like publishing 4 patterns a month. That's probably not the best fit because you probably require more dedicated time than I can give you. But yeah.
So where can people find you online? Do you want me to throw your Instagram profile into?
Yes. So Instagram is probably a good way to reach me. I'm very not social media savvy and I don't really have a web presence. So it's Instagram and email. And it begins with a C in both places. Begins with a C on Instagram, begins with a C on Ravelry, and begins with a C at gmail.com. So
that's awesome. And maybe, can I ask you, I know we didn't talk about this before, but you said you don't have a big web presence. How have you built your business without having like, the big fancy website and you just have a few places people find you? We found you.
Yes, Sarah is most impressed about how
So the answer to that is very slowly. So I've been tech editing for about 12 years now. And I think it took me a while to convince myself, and it's sort of circular, but it took me a while to convince myself that this is not something I wanted to do full time, not because I don't enjoy it, but it's not something I think I can sustain doing full time. I just knew, I think within a couple of years, that if I did this full time, I would get burned out. And so it was somewhat of a conscious decision. The other thing is, I really don't enjoy marketing, which is, I think, something all of us are on board with. But I knew that I think I knew that I was never going to be able to do it full time. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to not bother, and if people find me, they find me.
Which we do. We found you.
Which sometimes I'm still surprised by how people find me, but I guess, yeah.
Well, I think
you do good work.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Your reputation precedes you. So do you get a lot of referrals? Is that how you've built your business?
Yes, I have also. So I used to do a lot of test knitting, and sometimes I still do. So a lot of designers have found me that way. Mm-hmm. And really, Instagram has been more of a marketing tool than I had expected, because I think like the first week that I was on Instagram, someone I used to know way back when reached out and they were like, will you edit my book? And I was like, whoa, okay.
That's fantastic. I think that's really encouraging, because we have a lot of our audience are tech editors, and they're like, how do I do this? And it's really nice to talk to someone who's like, I don't know, I'm not into marketing, I'm not going to have a website, but, just people find me.
I will say that this is not a choice for everyone, right? If this is what you need to do to support your family and this is your only source of income, then you don't really have the luxury of saying, I'm not going to market myself.
Right.
But I do have that option. And I also decided that if I was going to have a side hustle, I don't want it to take over my life. Right. So it was a conscious decision to keep it a side hustle and to not let it take over my life, and to sort of, the most important thing is that it continues to be something I feel motivated to come back to, because this is something I do sort of in my spare time. So it had to be something sustainable.
Right.
But again, that is not a choice available to everyone, and I recognize that.
Yeah.
I love that, though, because then it really is you doing the thing, and it's doing what fits you best, and it allows you to do your best work.
Right. And I also recognize that I'm not going to maybe attract the most number of clients by not offering certain services, right? But then I think you have to sort of make a decision as to, do you want to be all things to all people, or do you want to attract a certain type of client, right?
Right. Exactly. So in a sense, though, that also gives you the way to be somewhat choosy. I don't know if choosy is the right word, of who you want to work with. Like you said, you're very
right. You're only going to work with
intentional. Working with people that you want to work with, and why you want to work with them. Right. I think that matters.
I think we have one more question. This, and again, it's like very a broad question. What tools do you use? And we could say this, like, you've already talked about stitch markers, but I want to hear maybe like what is your favorite editing tools or your favorite, like what can you not do your job without?
Well, Excel. Excel is, I think everyone would agree, it's extremely, it's not impossible, but it's unnecessarily difficult to edit without Excel.
Unnecessarily difficult. Very good.
I love that.
And if you are designing and not really using a spreadsheet tool, why? Don't do that to yourself, right? It's so much easier to even say you made a mistake in measuring your gauge. Going back and fixing it would take forever if you didn't use a spreadsheet. And if you did use a spreadsheet, it's 10 seconds of work.
Right.
And it really helps to learn certain functions in Excel, like functions for rounding or functions for using named cells. Those things, I think I would encourage people who are not tech, not even tech editors, but even if you're designing, and even if you're designing accessories, right? It really helps to spend some time learning those things. It doesn't have to be Excel; it can be Google Sheets. Personally, I just use Excel. I don't really create charts or anything, so I don't have a favorite charting software. I use Excel for if I want to map out a certain set of increases or decreases, or even chart a place pattern to make sure it works.
Do you use it for short rows? Do you
Yes.
use it?
Oh, yes.
But do you map it out or do you just do numbers?
I map it out. I map out every stitch. And that's why socks are such a pain for me because I have to map out every heel turn row. And it's, yeah. Editing tools. Otherwise, I mostly edit using PDF, Adobe PDF Reader, and using the little sticky notes and the insert functions there. I also edit in Word using track changes, and that is nice if you already have a relationship with the designer and you kind of know what each other is doing, so you don't mess up their whole formatting. It's really upsetting when someone sends me a nicely formatted pattern and it's in Word, and then I have to make markups, and that's
You just export it to PDF. Just don't.
right. Especially when they request that you track changes, and I'm like, oh, this is going to make you so unhappy in the end.
Yeah, because all those images are like going to move on you.
So that's another thing I would recommend to designers who are beginning is don't lay out your pattern in its final format before sending it to editing. Right?
It's going to get moved around so much.
It is going to get moved around, especially if you have never had a pattern edited before and you don't know what mistakes you might make or what you're missing. Please don't put it in final format.
Yes.
I agree.
Oh, that's such good advice.
It really is. I mean, it's simple, but it's very good advice. Working from drafts that are not all finalized and stylized and everything, because all that stuff's going to have to move. Everything's going to need to be rearranged by the time you're done editing it. So yeah, don't waste the time doing that ahead of time.
And sometimes when I think as an editor, you see a pattern in final format, you are going to hesitate to make big structural changes, right? That's just how it is. You might feel like this pattern is totally difficult to use, but then you're also cognizant of the fact that this person put so much effort into it. Do you really want them to start from scratch? So yeah.
That's excellent.
I just mark them up anyway. Mark up the heck out of them.
This is another tip I learned from my day job where we do a lot of our work through PowerPoints, and if you want your client to make the least number of changes, you present them with a super polished, very nicely done PowerPoint, and they're very less likely to make huge changes to it.
All the tips. Man, you just like gave us a ton of great info.
Mistakes, what mistakes? Look how pretty it is.
It's true, right? You have enough pretty pictures and white space and nicely lined up bullets, and people will overlook a lot of things. It's just true.
I love it. Thank you for joining us today, Chaitanya. It
Thank you
was
so much.
such a pleasure to chat with you for an hour about all things tech and sweaters and editing and changes. I love it.
Modifications. This was fantastic. I'm so glad you joined us. I'm so glad we got you on. I love
Thank you so much for having me, because I was so convinced this would be over in 15 minutes and no one was going to watch.
How wrong you are. This was amazing. This is like one of our best episodes just because of all the little things you said. I'm going to have to go back through and watch
Thank
again.
you.
Yep. I'm so glad it's recorded.
It is. I hope. Did we turn on the recording?
Nope. We're good. We're good.
It says live, so
Yep.
something's happening.
Thank you for being here. And
Thank you so much.
we're going to see you later on for sure. Thanks a lot for being here. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
And let's do this. And Christina, we have some announcements to make, don't we?
We do have some news. So first thing is Tech Tip Talk is on Patreon now. I don't know if you know, we did that this month, and we have a Discord network that you are invited to when you join us on Patreon. There are a couple tiers you can join, and there's different benefits for them. Check it out on Patreon if you get things out of our broadcast, if you enjoy the content we give and what we talk about. We are having a ball in our Discord network, and
We really are.
the knit nights are fun, and you can ask questions at any time. It's a way for us to pay our guests, and it's a way for us to be more involved in our audience and be more available to you. So check it out. Check it out.
Yeah, we started the Patreon because we really felt like this is a way for us to move forward in Tech Tip Talk, and we're really excited to be spending that connection time with our patrons on our Discord network. So we'd love to have you along. Come and join us at the link in the chat. And as usual, do subscribe here on YouTube so that you get notifications when we have our next interview in our Q&A, and sign up for our monthly newsletter where we talk about all the things and even cover previously asked questions and past episodes. And
yeah, the newsletter is good because it's got everything. You won't miss anything, and it's easy because it just goes right to your email. You don't have to remember to check anything.
Yep.
And everything goes there first. So the newsletter is great.
So how about some book update?
Yes, we have more news. We are negotiating our contract with a publisher for our book. It's going to be published in the fall of 2023. We are so excited to be at this stage and have done all this work, to have come this far, to be at this place, and we're really excited about it. So we will be signing very soon, and we're realizing today, we were working together this morning, like we have so much work to do.
Yeah,
we've done so much already, so it's not as bad, you know. It's good, but we're just so excited. Oh my
We're
God.
so excited. We can't begin to tell you how excited we are to be able to share all the things that we've done to make this book a thing with you all. So we'll be sure to keep you guys in the loop on our progress in our newsletter and in our Patreon. So make sure
and we are working very hard to make sure this will be a comprehensive and helpful resource for you guys, like forever. So
yep.
Oh, we're so excited.
So last announcement is our next broadcast will be March 21st at noon Eastern time. And if you are subscribed here on YouTube, you'll get the notification, and we'll also be sending more details about our guest in our newsletter. So do we have anything else?
I think that's it. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our interview as much as we did. Oh my God, we were so great. And we'll see you next month.
Take care, you guys. Bye.